everyone. We are getting into Unit 4 of this class. So we're going to be starting to take a look at some of the ideas such as enlightenment, starting to question the world around us, and then starting to question and ask for change out of the systems that have been long going for centuries. Okay? We're entering into the next couple of centuries where it's going to be much more of like, oh, I've heard of this before because it wasn't that long ago. 300 years ago is kind of when we're looking at, starting to get into those 1700s, 1800s time period. So we're getting more present here, guys. Something I want you to think about as we go through all of our different topics of this unit, and hint, hint, this makes a really good essay question. Following the Enlightenment period, what causes people to revolt? Okay, so what topics, what ideas were people upset about within the next couple of decades that we are going to be studying? And we're going to be taking a look at a couple of different revolutions that happened throughout the world and those ideas leading up to those revolutions, things like that. So as we're going, consider, is this something that could cause people to revolt? Okay, is this a big topic? So this week, we are getting into the Age of Enlightenment. Okay? So we are following here the scientific revolution. And during the scientific revolution, people were questioning the world around them. Okay, we're going to start seeing some of those laws and theories that you may be studying in science class right now. Okay, the law of gravity, the law of motion, all of those different questions of like, why does the world operate the way that it does? We're starting to seek answers and trying to study, make predictions. What are the next things to come? And so coming out of that era of studying the world, people start to question human beings. We start to question our own thoughts and our own processes. So out of this comes this idea called natural law, that we have this natural law, this natural list of rules that we all are agreeing to, and it helps us have better relationships with each other. It makes us sane. And if you think about it, without laws, we are just creatures roaming around with each other. And it's these natural laws, these made up contracts with each other that keep us from essentially killing each other. And so our philosophers here, our scientists start to question, like, why do we agree to the standards that have been set? Should we have new standards that we need to operate society by? Right? Like, are we okay with what's happening essentially in the world? Are we okay with the behaviors that are occurring? How we've set up, again, our structures, our governments, things like that. So we're really going to start seeing people studying and questioning, how do people think? How do human beings think? Which is a really cool area to start getting into. So our natural law, again, is starting to help explain humanity. Why do we operate the way that we do? Do we need to continue operating the way that we do? And as people started to question human thought, human interactions with each other, it really is going to start influencing how society works and how government works. Because as you start to question your reasoning, your thinking, you're going to start questioning other people's reasoning and thinking, including your government. So we're going to take a look at these two guys here on the right, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, who were two of our most really influential philosophers. They had some great ideas, and a lot of their theories and thoughts actually ended up changing the way a lot of our governments around the world operate today. So taking a look at Thomas Hobbes first, his big thing was that he believed people were naturally cruel, naturally greedy, and selfish. That's just our human nature, is to be very selfish, to think about ourselves and nothing else. And in order to control the human population, we need to have really strict laws. And we need to have absolute rulers where one person is making decisions. We don't involve the whole society when trying to decide what is the next action to take. So Thomas Hobbes believed that in order to control the masses, you needed a single strong ruler. His belief was that an absolute monarchy was going to be your best form of government. Okay, so you've got a king or a queen that is making all of the decisions. Don't involve the general population because they are just going to be generally naturally greedy, selfish, cruel, and so on. Okay, so having that strict power and that people are naturally selfish, that's going to be Thomas Hobbes' legacy here. In comparison, we've got John Locke. Okay, John Locke believed that people were reasonable and moral, and that that's our guiding light, not the selfishness. No, John Locke believed that we had morals that were going to guide our actions. And so he believed that everyone was born with these morals and these rights, right? Like if you're born a human, you should automatically be granted some of these things, such as life, liberty, and property. And that it's up to your government to protect those rights. Okay, so a government, whoever's in control making decisions, they should be guaranteeing every human born in that area life, or at least access to life, access to liberty or freedoms, and access to have property. Okay? So out of his philosophies, his reasoning, he really believed that people could overthrow its government. His thought was, people have morals, and if your government is no longer following the same morals as you or is not doing the job that you think it should do, that people should have a right to change it. And so we're going to see that a lot of the ideas of John Locke actually end up coming back to influence the colonists during the American Revolution. We're going to see quite a bit of that next week. So the big thing, again, taking out of these two, Thomas Hobbes believed that people were naturally greedy. You need to have strict rules in order to control the masses. John Locke believed that people were born with these morals and that government should be working for the people. And if you're upset with that, then you should be able to change the government. So we're going to go through here just real quick. I'm not asking you to memorize any of this stuff, but just real quick, I wanted to show you some of the other major philosophers who are going to have their theories play a role in revolutions over the next couple of weeks as we're taking a look at revolutions. So we've got Montesquieu. Okay, Montesquieu believed that the idea for a government should be a system of checks and balances. We actually have that system here in the United States today, where it's kind of like a check on each other if you've ever played chess. Okay, so off to the right here, we've got this graphic where we can see the three different branches of our government. And in some way or another, they all have an upper hand over each other. Yet they also are underneath the other two in other ways. So those are what we call checks and balances, where you don't just have this unlimited power. You're not able to just go and do whatever you want. There's going to be checks on every single action. So that idea first comes from our good friend here, Montesquieu. Next we have Voltaire. He believed that there should be freedom of speech for all people, that we are granted with this ability to communicate with each other and we should be able to freely communicate with each other. Next we have Diderot. Diderot wrote the Encyclopedia. Okay, so originally the Encyclopedia was this book of just all knowledge. It's not like the dictionary where you're just defining things. It's actually where you compile just a mass amount of information. Okay, so Diderot was that guy who just compiled information, wrote it down, and then he would mass produce more copies of the encyclopedia. And so this is where we see a lot of those Enlightenment ideas starting to spread around the world. We start to have people studying these different theories of human interaction. Next, we have Rousseau. Rousseau believed that there were too many restrictions placed on society, going back to that idea of freedom. People should be able to do, say what they want. And then because I always like to include women into our studies, we've got Mary Wollstonecraft. She believed in equal education for men and women. She wrote about this in her novel, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Now, this was a very radical idea, especially during the 1700s. The idea that women are educated. Not very well accepted during this time, obviously, because during this time it was men who were rich were the ones going to get educated, and that just wasn't women's role in society during this time. So we're going to start seeing from here on out this fight for equality between the genders. Next, not only are we starting to question how we as humans interact with each other in forms of communication and government, but we're also starting to think about how we use money, how we trade things, ideas with each other. And so, physiocrats, which were again kind of like our Enlightenment thinkers questioning how society needs to operate with each other, started to support this idea called laissez-faire. And this is a way of economy. Okay, so you're going to hear this term, I know for a fact, again, your senior year of high school when you're taking economics, either with me, Mr. Swatton. But essentially, this is the idea that government should be hands off with money and what you're producing. Okay, so Adam Smith, he was the one who kind of was advocating for this idea throughout the world. Okay, so he's arguing in favor of a free market. Now, a free market is when people are deciding what they want to buy, and the sellers are deciding how much they want to make and what price they're going to sell that stuff at. Very much so here in the United States, we have a free market for the most part. Okay, that's in comparison maybe to countries that maybe have strict controllers where you are only allowed this much money a week and you have to spend it on this amount of goods. Okay, so there are countries out in the world where they have the government has strict rules, strict control over what is able to be made. Finally, Adam Smith was arguing that the government had a duty to protect society, administer justice, and provide public works. Okay, so this idea of like government is working for the people, yet the government needs to protect its people by doing this, this, and this. That's essentially where we're going to start seeing people going. And it's going to really start leading to people questioning, is our government good? Are people able to have these natural rights, these free communication format, all of that? People are starting to really look at each other, look at their governments. And if they aren't happy with it, we're also going to see they're going to start asking for that change. Now, when, obviously, as people start to ask for that change, not everyone is going to appreciate asking for change. So not everyone agreed with the new ideas that were coming out, especially those who were in control of society during this time, which is really the government and the church, who is really controlling society at this point. Government is the armies, they're controlling the money, and church is really influencing how society thinks. Okay, they're guiding that moral standpoint. And a lot of times the government and the church were intertwined in different ways. So they believed, the government and the church believed that people were starting to question the old order. And so they had to defend the old order. They believed that God set up the old order. So essentially, the government and the church had this series of thoughts that essentially led to this idea of, if you're challenging me, you're challenging God. And therefore, you're challenging God, and that's wrong. So we lead down this path where the government and the church were not happy about all of the different ideas coming out during this time. Because essentially it's going to take away their power, right? And so this fight against these new ideas led to what we call censorship, or the government and church was trying to censor the population. They were not wanting the encyclopedia or different books. They didn't want people talking about these new ideas. And so, in order to try to stall or keep people from talking about these different ideas, officials would actually go around and collect the encyclopedia. They would collect any books that were challenging the government or the church, and they would burn them out in the streets, and they would imprison anyone who was spreading these ideas. Okay, so we're going to start really seeing this fighting between society asking for change and the government and the church not wanting to even discuss these new ideas. So obviously, talking out on the streets about these different ideas, wanting to question everything, led to needing to kind of talk in secret about how new ideas were wanting to be spread. So we end up seeing a lot of conversation spread in what we call salons. Okay, salons are not like your hair salons that you think about today. No, salons were more of like cafes where people would come together. They would be educated coming together, and they would drink coffee and they would drink wine because that was a lot safer than water. Fun fact, water was super gross in the cities. They didn't have current day plumbing like we have today, so water wasn't getting filtered. So people are drinking caffeine and they're drinking wine, rum, beer. Okay, and so because of that, they're coming together in these cafes and they're kind of getting drunk with each other where they're talking about philosophies, they're talking about ideas and new changes that they want to see. So some of the topics that they talked about here were new literature, arts, science, philosophy. Now, salons started out as a place for middle class women to get together and talk about the poetry that they're reading at the time, but it actually ended up becoming a spot for anyone who was enlightened or wanted to talk about changes, wanted to talk about new ways for society to operate, come together. And just so you guys know, if you're like me and kind of interested in music as well, this is when we start to see our classical music coming about. Okay, so our music artists, Handel, Mozart, all of them were reflecting these ideas of change, emotion into what we know as classical music today. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this week's topics. Again, just real quick, we saw how people were wanting to see change. They're starting to question society. We saw a slew of different ideas of how society needed to change, what government needs to do for its people, and then saw how the government kind of responded to these needs for change or people asking for change. So again, we want to come back to this idea of what caused people to revolt. Okay, so we see now from everything we just talked about, these new ideas that people are starting to have. But now we're going to start going down this path of what actually caused these people to revolt. What injustices did they feel like were happening against them? Okay, so as you guys know, if you have any questions, please reach out.